Femming up the place, regendering the public through performance. Caribbean women have been defined at the interstices of colonial power through colonization of Africa, India, and the Caribbean, slavery and indenture, and everything that followed. The socio-cultural and politico-economic context of colonialism has invented and continues to shape the meanings given to race, gender, and social class in these spaces and indeed across the globe. Coloniality remains a strong determinant of the new identities produced within these conditions specific to colonialism. Building on postcolonial critiques of racialized gendered identities in the Caribbean, this paper moves to unravel the space-making and self-making processes employed by same-sex loving women in Trinidad, demonstrating how they utilize their bodies, particularly their erotic selves, to engage in a decolonial praxis. I focus on their performances of gender in public spaces, engaging the intersection of postcolonial racialized gendered identities and space-making. Gender performance can be used to reinforce colonial understandings of space, race, and gender, but also to resist and refashion these ascriptions through same-sex loving women's subversions or troubling of normative geographies, creation of new alternative and liminal bridging spaces, and their temporary co-opting of public spaces. In this presentation, I use quotes taken from interviews with same-sex loving women who deliberately engage forms of gender performance that highlight their differential treatment while contesting the social norms that facilitate the same. Inhabiting public space as a same-sex loving woman exposes one to situations that, while not overtly dangerous, may be extremely embarrassing or uncomfortable. On her map, Jaya depicted the resulting relationship to public space, particularly the city of Port of Spain. I think that's how I perceive most interactions in Trinidad. This is just Port of Spain, I guess. This doesn't necessarily represent me jumping off a building, but the difference between me, well, this girl on top of the building and this one on the ground, is kind of like that fundamental disconnect that people have in public space, especially when they feel like they have something to hide. So I can be either one. I have felt like both at different times. Like I'm out on a ledge, out in society. Like too much of me is being seen, like I want to retreat. And I've also felt like I've seen people that way and how it is for them. And I've wanted to do something, reach out, help them, empathize, but I'm afraid to. It's not how society is predicated, so keep your distance. And it's not fair that people just pass each other with no knowledge of how unsafe or perilous that person's existence is, how much of their time is consumed with concealing huge parts of themselves. And I feel like most of my public interactions are like that. This somewhat pessimistic outlook seems to be repeated by a number of women in this study who express dislike for sharing public space, being in the city, being around other people, and instead seek safety in a retreat or enclave, like a gay bar, LGBT-only events, or a private home. But engaging with public spaces is part of everyday navigations, which for same-sex loving women who are also gender non-conforming can result in unsettling experiences, ranging from awkward looks and ridicule to verbal or physical altercations. Using public transportation can be a particularly unpleasant experience. Once while traveling in a maxi taxi with her best friend who is conventionally attractive, like slim and tall, that kind of stuff, Reagan and her were mistakenly thought to be a couple and received verbal hostilities. Reagan joked, "I did have a taxi driver called me a faggot once, but that was the day I was wearing flannel," dismissing his comment by referencing the flannel, stereotypical wear for butch lesbians. Stevie shared a similar experience. An old guy stopped for me, a taxi, and as I got into the front seat, he said, "You's not a boy, you look like a boy," very loudly. The entire back of the car had passengers. Then he went on to say before he decided to stop for me, he was telling the girl in the back seat, "Let me see what this hen would do if I stop for him. That boy looked too much like a girl." And he went on and on about it very loudly, and the AC was on and no music, so everyone listened, and it was very embarrassing. He then asked me if I go to church and kind of pushed that idea to me, and then said he's not going to charge me for the ride and he's happy I'm not a hen. It was just very embarrassing for me and uncomfortable because I was barely responding. Today I was walking in Port of Spain and two men shouted, "She like a man boy," and laughed as I walked. Then a few minutes later another man shouted, "You's a girl or a boy?" In a public sphere that has tightly guarded gendered boundaries, Reagan and Stevie's embodiment of gender makes them a confusing sight as they do not adhere to one category or definition. The taxi driver's comments and tone give insight into men's policing of a masculinity that sees sexual and gender nonconforming men as an affront or a threat, while women's nonconformity, as experienced by Stevie and Reagan, is met with a range of reactions, including curiosity, confusion, ridicule, and annoyance. While these excerpts were about encounters with men, women also participate in the shaming and policing, as I'll demonstrate in a second. Other women in this study who were masculine presenting noted the reactions to their gender presentation in different arenas, including workspaces and at leisure activities like at the waterfront, the movie theaters, or bars. The women noted that hostility towards them increased if they were accompanied by a woman who presented her gender as more stereotypically feminine. If the pair engaged in behavior that might indicate they were a couple, they experienced even more scrutiny and possibly more confrontational encounters. Shannon is femme-presenting, saying her choice to have short pink hair and to wear dresses is deliberate. I think I do present as queer, but because it is more feminine or more traditionally feminine, this phrase come up today, the personal is political. I deliberately present as feminine. It's not just, oh, I like dresses. I deliberately wear dresses. So I think that's pretty queer, but not everybody thinks so. After dyeing her hair pink, she said, "This woman walking down the road and give me this stink eye and said, 'Jesus loves you,' and I say thanks. That's how you know you're rich, when strangers stop you in the street and tell you Jesus loves you." Shannon also notes the difference between her femme presentation and her friends' genderqueer and androgynous presentations. There is the constant threat of being assaulted, a lot of verbal abuse, and because they're so visible, it changes the dynamic of what they feel is safe. Because I present as femme, people don't assume automatically that I'm not straight. So I don't usually have to deal with that. But a few of my friends have more to deal with being physically queer. She shared the following story. This one time I was in a maxi and these two baby studs come in the maxi. And as soon as they left, basically everybody in the maxi started making comments. "I don't know why them girls does want to look so, They were very masculine presenting, but they weren't binding or anything. So they still clearly female, but they're very masculine and boyish. You see them girls, I don't understand them. I don't understand that lifestyle choice, And the whole maxi was a buzz of murmuring the second these two left the vehicle. I can't deal with that happening to me. So I guess that straight passing privilege that I have is kind of a blessing. I constantly worry about my friend's safety, the same androgynous one. Just always checking in, like, how you doing? Like, you'll hear, they'll send me a message about what happened. As soon as I hear, it's like, "Are you okay?" You never know when it's going to escalate or if it might. So, gender and gender performance remained influential in how women were perceived and treated in other public spaces, thus leading to their feelings of safety or lack thereof. Shannon goes on to share her experience at one of the major movie multiplexes in Port of Spain called Movietown, where she and her girlfriend were met with stares. She said, "I don't know, every time somebody passed, they were like, stare, and I don't know if it was my hair or if we were sitting down too close or if she presented too masculinely or what, but it was weird." Even though she noted not having heard of same-sex loving and gender-transgressing women being physically harmed, Shannon felt that she was not safe enough in Trinidad to be outrightly affectionate with her partner in public spaces. Anna, Rachel, and Sandy had similar experiences at this and other movie theaters in Trinidad. They were also in the space as couples, with one woman presenting more masculinely and her partner presenting as more feminine. The woman's embodiment of masculinity upends the female-male relational power dynamic expected of normative heterosexuality, amplifying the visibility of their gender and sexual transgressions. Sandy mentioned an occasion when she and her girlfriend were sitting on the waterfront. Sandy's legs rested across her girlfriend's lap as she played with her toes. This gesture of intimacy prompted a woman to try to save these lesbians from their lives of sin. Sandy said, "We were eating some chocolates. It was a totally harmless activity. And this woman came up to us and she said in a preachy manner, 'I am here to tell you that the Lord will bring you through this.' She didn't say this lesbian thing, but you could tell what motivated her. She saw two women and they kind of fondling each other and she came with her Christian views." From the above selection of quotes, we can see recurring themes. Firstly, there is tension between being seen or visible in a space and the potential consequences of this visibility. Shannon wanted to be visible as queer, even though she may face ridicule and aggression. She saw this visibility as a necessary part of challenging the dominant sexual and gender politics in Trinidad and Tobago, of which religion, the second theme, plays a large part. Religion is pervasive in Caribbean society. There is nowhere that it is not. Family, school, law, walking down the waterfront, or riding in a maxi taxi. In my book project, I argue that coloniality has resulted in the integration of religion into the state, as well as the revival and retention practices of diasporic groups who held on to their religion as part of their identity, or because of their intense desire for there to be more to life than what they were experiencing on colonial plantations. At an interpersonal level, by the actions of its adherents, when it comes to gender and sexual nonconformity, religion is often judgmental, as well as confrontational. The women in my study mentioned encounters with followers of Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam who were intolerant of their sexual and gender transgressions and verbalized this hatred. How does one respond to such a situation? Sandy's decision to debate religion and Christian love was the only such response. In every other case, the woman remained passive, listening to the ridicule or the unsolicited counseling until they could remove themselves from the situation. The woman's own race or religion did not influence their responses, but it may be worth noting that the incidents they described tended to include people who shared their race and or religion. Jean, for instance, referred to several Indo-Trinidadian-dominated towns and villages in central Trinidad as Cooleyville, alluding to the predominance of working-class, traditional, Indo-Trinidadian ideals and values, such as the male domination of public spaces and female subservience to male power. It was in such spaces that Jean, Indo-Trinidadian herself, felt most hostility towards her masculine presentation, especially when she was dating a girl of mixed race. My book project also engages decolonial praxis as it pertains to religion and spirituality by examining it as erotic practice, as conceptualized by Audre Lorde. Which brings us to the third theme, intimacy, love, and affection, not given space in the public sphere. This is sharply contrasted to the prevalence of street harassment and the sexualization of women's bodies for the male gaze. I argue that coloniality, through its confinement of colonized bodies to the plantation or the yard, its rampant violence both on and off plantations, its middle-class respectability politics, and its use of religion to control morality all contribute to the masculinizing of the public sphere that these women are resisting. Seeking visibility in public space is simply saying, we are here, this is who we are, we have a right to be here, we belong, as women, but also as same-sex loving and gender non-conforming. Their visibility in the public space harkens to the legacy of cross-dressing in Carnival as a method of resistance and protest against the colonial regime. Carnival is an example of the temporary co-opting of public space by marginalized groups to enact their politics of resistance through song, music, dance, and dress. The same can be said of LGBT fetes and parties, and of meetings and protests, like the recent mobilizing around Jason Jones's challenge to the sodomy laws in Trinidad and Tobago, the counter-protests by the religious right, and the continued peaceful action by advocacy groups like the Silver Lining Foundation, CAISO, and the Allies for Justice and Diversity. Gender performance is thus not a new strategy for challenging hegemonic power and can be seen in the photos and videos of these latest acts of rebellion. The everyday deployment of gender performance by same-sex loving and gender non-conforming women continue this legacy of resistance with the aim of achieving societal transformation not limited to the public sphere.